Hi there, everybody. Can you hear me? I think you can. I can hear myself quite a bit. So it's 1 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to just welcome everybody to the presentation this afternoon. We're going to be talking about evidence-based acquisition for primary source content, a new model for access and ownership. My name is Lisa McDonald, and I am what's known as a historical collections specialist for ProQuest. I cover Ohio, Kentucky, and Michigan, so I work with Case Western Reserve University. I'm going to kick off this lively discussion today and share a little bit of background about this new model for adding primary source collections and how this works. I think it is true that the concept of evidence-based acquisitions is not a new concept. But traditionally, we think of it as something for ebooks or maybe streaming video, but we don't really think of that as something that we do with primary sources. So that's where things get a little bit different here. So today's speakers are from the University of Arizona, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then also Case Western Reserve University. And all of them have been early adopters. They're going to share some of their experiences and talk to you about implementation and the types of things that they saw on their campuses when they tried this new program. So for starters, let me just say that ProQuest has a lot of content, a lot of primary source collections, and you may hear me say that a few times during this presentation. I don't think that that surprises people, but the slide that you're looking at right now gives you some numbers of just sort of the breadth and depth of the ProQuest primary source collections. And what you're seeing here represents a lot of different things. This is years of digitizing publications and archival collections. So these are things that represent Chadwick Healy collections, historical newspapers, ProQuest congressional government documents, as well as the Alexander Street Press portfolio that is now a part of ProQuest. And I think that in general, librarians especially are very well aware of the importance of primary sources in teaching and learning. But I think we don't always stop to think about why primary sources are important. So ProQuest actually created a survey recently where we asked faculty members, why do you feel primary sources are important and why do you use them in your teaching and in your own research? And I like to point out a few of the responses that we received. The number one answer that faculty tended to say is that primary sources are important because they help students develop critical thinking skills. They also mentioned that primary sources help provide a greater understanding of the topic being studied. And I'm skipping one, but number 4 is that they allow students to come to their own conclusions about events in history. So I think it's just good to get a little bit of perspective on that. And, you know, a lot of folks in the audience may be familiar with ProQuest primary sources. For the most part, they focus on the humanities. They focus on things like history, the social sciences, the arts. And our collections, they also represent partnerships that we have with many, many, many different types of institutions. They work with us to digitize their materials and to make them available to the library community. So we're always, you know, very proud of the partnerships that we have and the collections that we've been able to build. So I think, you know, when you stop and you think about primary sources being very, very important, and the fact that ProQuest has, I'll say it again, a lot of primary source content available. Our catalog of primary source collections starts to become a little bit overwhelming sometimes when I go out and I speak with libraries and I come talking about, you know, we have this catalog and it's got about 400 different collections that you can choose from now, and we add typically 20 to 30 new primary source collections every year. I think what happens is that librarians, they usually have a wish list of things, that they feel would be valuable for their campus and that they know that their professors would be interested in, but that wish list just keeps getting longer. As more things are coming along, it becomes very difficult to sort of keep up with that wish list. So if you work in a library where you're lucky enough to be able to add a few new primary source historical collections, maybe with some end-of-year funds or something like that, how do you decide which collection you should purchase? Should you look at something like early European books? Should you look at something like the NAACP papers, maybe a historical newspaper or two? We have a new collection that's a magazine archive called the Youth and Pop Culture Magazine Archive, so that's something, that I'm out there talking about now that might be interesting for people. And thinking about all of this, it kind of started a conversation with a lot of our libraries, where they, kind of started thinking about the difference between access to these collections versus ownership of these collections, because these are things that, again, traditionally we've always thought of as these would be things that we would purchase with a perpetual access license, or a PAL as we call it. But maybe the thought came about, what if we just take that catalog and we kind of light up everything, and we'll give our campus access to all of these different primary source materials, and we'll see what happens. What types of things will the professors gravitate towards? What types of things will the students start using for their assignments? And how could we maybe partner with ProQuest to make that work? So what we did was, we talked with a few institutions, and some of them are about to share their experiences with you right now. And we took that catalog of about 400 different collections, and we admittedly, not everything can be included, but about 350 plus out of that catalog is available in this program. And we thought, let's give it a try. We'll treat it like a subscription, and we'll kind of see what happens. So, like I said, these folks are going to share some of their experiences. Their feedback at sort of trying this with us and being early adopters of this idea is what brought us to a place where now I can start to show you some slides of how we're turning this into a more full-fledged offering for libraries. So I'm going to share with you just the basics of 3 different options that we've created. The first one is called the Primary Source Access and Build Plan, or as we lovingly refer to it internally, a Plan A. The idea behind a Plan A, I don't want to miss it, is that we are turning on that complete catalog, like I said, approximately 350 different primary source collections. As we are creating new collections, those are being added to that subscription for the library. So once a quarter, we will turn on anything that is new that has come out during the past 3 months. And the best part of this is it's kind of a win-win in the idea that the subscription amount that is paid, 2/3 of that is actually converted over to perpetual access at the end of each year. So I'm not very good at math. I like to keep things simple. Simple math, if your subscription costs $100 a year, 67 of those dollars are yours to keep at the end of that year to convert over to perpetual access. So it's a bit of a subscription / perpetual access type of a situation. And I know a lot of folks kind of look at it as an opportunity. If I was probably going to add a few new collections this year anyway, little bit extra, and I can turn on this entire catalog. And it becomes an evidence-based decision, because now you're able to listen to feedback from your faculty and your students, and you're able to see some usage data before you make those decisions on which things you want to buy. So that idea, though, was not perfect for everyone. So we have a couple of other options. The second one is referred to as the Primary Sources Select Access and Build Program, or a Plan B. And this is designed for folks who, for whatever reason, did not want to turn on all 350 collections. So they are able to select a group, so they take that catalog and they let us know which which ones they would like to see. They can select 50, 75, or 100 databases, but otherwise it works pretty much the same way, except in the fact that as new collections are added during the year, they are not added to the list because you've got a more static list in this situation. But at renewal time, you're able to add in a certain number of collections, and you can choose to opt for some of the newer things if you would like to. You're still converting 2/3 of your overall spend into perpetual access licenses at the end of each year. And then the third one that I want to mention to you is just referred to as the primary sources access plan. Internally, we call this a Plan D, but the idea here is it's a little bit lower cost to the university. It's strictly a subscription. So we're just going to light up that catalog of 350 plus databases, and it's a subscription only model, so there is no conversion to perpetual at the end of a year. But as a partner with ProQuest, being a part of this program, you are offered a nice discount if there is anything that you do want to buy as a perpetual access collection. It's sort of a built-in discount for you. So now that we've just kind of given you a little bit of a framework of the type of program that we're going to talk about, I'm going to turn it over to Holly from University of Arizona, and she's going to begin to share with you all a few experiences from these 3 universities after their first year or so of participating. Oh, Teresa.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Teresa Hazen, not Holly. Holly will be following me. Thanks for giving that introduction to the model. And I'll just go through the University of Arizona's experience in this program. So a little bit about us first. We're in Tucson, not Phoenix, which is ASU. Sometimes we get confused. People get confused. We have about 45,000 FTE and actually a little bit over $14.5 million. We call it the information access budget, which includes collections and also those tools and software to support discovery. We've got over 1,000 databases that we offer to our constituency. Recently we're given the designation of a Hispanic serving institution, so we're pretty excited about that. And we have a strong interdisciplinary emphasis. I would also add that we have the medical school in the state and the law school. So we're a very comprehensive, big university. And so this program, and we were Plan A. Actually, I don't think there were any letters when we started. I believe we were the first adopter of this, but we did get the whole package of the 350. So why did we go into this? So our previous models for acquiring archival content were failing to meet our needs because there was just not enough use to justify buying these collections. And so we really were looking for a different model that was going to work for us. We also have a history, University of Arizona has a history of trying out new acquisitions models. We've been in a DDA print and electronic program for almost a decade, so that's a pretty long time. So we were comfortable with those kinds of models. We had a previous EBA agreement with Alexander Street Press, so we had some experience working with ProQuest on this. And we also have a couple of librarians at our institution who are very keen on working with newspaper archives and back files. One is in our liaison to our history sociology department. The other is in our special collections, and they've partnered a lot to embed in the curriculum in some of these departments using primary source materials. And so it was important, for them to be able to have access to these kinds of things. So that is another reason that we were interested in the newspaper archives of this collection. So here's a timeline. Pre-November 2017, I want to say that we talked to ProQuest about this kind of developing this EBA model for about a year and a half. I don't know if there's anyone in the audience from ProQuest who might remember, but it was mainly with our budget management and procurement licensing librarian who kind of worked with ProQuest to develop this model. And so they went through and would meet at various conferences and discuss it. And then in November of 2017, here at Charleston, where deals are made, we got together in a room and really kind of committed to that and signed the deal at the end of the calendar year in 2017. So we're just coming up at the end of our 2 years. And then we implemented this program really January through May of 2018. And I didn't tell you, let me back up. I am the department head over tech services, acquisitions, resource sharing, so it was really up to my department working with Holly, who will introduce herself, the electronic resources and licensing librarian, to really implement this. But as you can see from the timeline, what were we doing at the same time? We were implementing Alma and Primo. So it was hard on the staff. I will tell you, this can be a lot of work to turn on, make discoverable, do all the checking of 350 resources, some of which are part of another resource or continuation. It's a lot of work. So my advice to you is don't do it during implementation of a library system. That was what was going on with us. And then we made the decision of what our first year purchase was going to be last year, and we are going to be doing that again this year. We entered into the five-year plan as Lisa showed you in the Plan A model. So this may be kind of hard to read. I'll kind of go through it. So this is implementation. So I, like I said, I'm in the tech services acquisitions department, and then there's a centralized collections department in which actually my department reports up to, and so we work super collaboratively together. And so what happens? ProQuest sends the title list and activation info URLs things to our collections department. Then the activation info is sent then to our tech services. In between this stuff right here, you can't read it. In between when the vendor sends it and then the tech services get that information, we did prioritize the things. This is something you might want to consider. Prioritize the things that we wanted to activate first. So some of those newspaper archives, some of the liaison librarians are like, yeah, this is what I want to activate first. Some of the collections librarians also identified things that they said, prioritize this. I think there was a health sciences librarian who also saw some video content she wanted us to turn on right away. And so what happened is then, it goes to tech services, and then underneath that, we did not load any MARC records, but what we did is we would activate the databases, the resources in our knowledge base, and then we would activate them in the central index, Primo, PCI. We had to check to see if they were discoverable. We had multiple staff working on this because this is a big project. Then we also worked with our collections group to make sure our database A to Z list had all the entries created. And then lastly, we had one of our librarians work with the configuration file for our easy proxy install to make sure that all that was updated. It's a lot of work. And then it goes back to to the content collections group to do the things or the communication plan, working with ProQuest on any LibGuides, training materials, things like that, and notifying of availability. So that was a pretty short presentation, but that's really what the process that we went through. And I'm going to turn it over to Holly next, who's going to talk to you about purchase decisions, some challenges we faced, and what the next steps are.
Hi, I'm Holly Talbot. I'm the Electronic Resources and Licensing Librarian at the University of Arizona. So talking about purchasing decisions, so since we were going through a migration during the first year of implementing this program, we actually felt our usage data was a bit all over the place and not really representative of what would get used in the future. And since we were prioritizing collections, not everything got turned on immediately. So we actually de-emphasized using usage as a way to determine what things to purchase or not purchase. This is not the way we're going to make decisions, going forward. But instead, we focused on purchasing collections that represented campus research and teaching areas, things of local and regional focus. There was some, we were given usage, so we did look at usage metrics. And then continuations of already acquired collections. So there are a few examples of the things we got. We got 8 collections in total, but definitely newspapers and then border and migration studies online. Those were all things that were of particular interest to us. All right. So talking about some of the challenges, Teresa already touched on a few of these. Particularly, there was a long lead time from when we got access to the stuff on the ProQuest platform and when we could actually make it discoverable, just because there was a large amount of content that we had to turn on. And because we had that long lead time, it was hard to market some of these things and really say like, oh, look, it's available in our systems now. And so that kind of led to a lack of engagement and adoption by our liaisons, librarians, and that's something that we really need to, rectify in the future. We also had a bit of a truncated purchasing window just because we had a lot of things going on, so we had to make decisions very quickly. I already talked about the migration, and then there's also something to consider. So we, like Teresa said, don't load MARC records for things that are available in the knowledge base, but there was a bit of a lag time between new collections becoming available. So like Lisa said, that's like 20 to 30 new collections each year, and when that is added into our knowledge base, so there'd be a bit of a lag time between those two things. It can also be a bit hard to keep up with the content that is added later because it doesn't come out necessarily on a set schedule. So we would get notified, here and there when the things actually become available. Yeah. So what's next? Definitely increasing our discoverability and visibility of resources to the library and campus stakeholders. We want to communicate better, have a marketing plan. We do have some LibGuides that ProQuest made that are now available that we can point to, but we really want to get adoption up among our liaison librarians. And then we also want to take a closer look around our usage now that we've been up on Alma Primo for a while now, and the kinks have been, worked out. So actually doing our evidence-based acquisitions that way. And yeah, increasing engagement with stakeholders on future purchases, which we've already started to do because we're coming up on our second year, so we're going to be making our second year purchase decisions very soon. So we've been engaging with liaisons, pulling that usage, all that kind of stuff. All right, and now I'm handing it over to Tom, who's going to talk about his experiences.
Hello, I'm Tom Tepper. I'm with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The University of Illinois is also a comprehensive institution. We're a land grant with about 34,000 undergraduates and almost 16,000 graduate students. We have a library or a law school. We just started a medical program for the first time on our campus, and that's been a big change for our institution. But we have over 150 degree programs, pretty much running the gamut from astronomy to zoology. The university library itself has been the largest public university library in the U.S. We have about 14 million volumes, or volume equivalents, approaching 15, 24 million other items, and about a $19 million acquisitions budget, plus gift and endowment funds. So we have had a long-standing, as a state institution, commitment to access and discovery as well. We're effectively open door for any citizen of the state and have over 1 million online visits weekly. So we are a very active library, and active from the standpoint of electronic resources as well. You know, we've pushed very aggressively in that direction over the last decade, and in part because we've had a challenged fiscal state for really the better part of a decade. Some of you may remember the economic downturn in about 2005 or so, 2004. For us, that really didn't end, because about, I guess it would be 6 years ago or so, we had a split government in the state of Illinois, with the governor's office controlled by one party and the legislature controlled by another, and they could agree on nothing. So basically, for 4 years, we had nothing done, and for several years, there was no budget for the university from the state of Illinois. It was quite challenging for us. But that really sharpened our appetite for experimentation. We pushed pretty aggressively in print and electronic DDA, evidence-based acquisitions models, streaming media, collaboration with other institutions, both the Big Ten, which is our primary regional consortial partner, but also CARLI, which is our statewide consortia, and the state university system. So we've really moved fairly aggressively in that direction, trying to fund both electronic resource acquisition, but also digitization of materials. Now that broad-based mission actually has been challenging for us. You know, how do you support a comprehensive STEM environment while also supporting broad-based humanities and social science programs? You know, within the Big Ten, you know, you engage in some of this institutional comparison with your own subject specialists, sometimes with your peers at other institutions. And you know, I like to look at our institution as really offering the programs that Indiana University and Purdue University offer with 2/3 of the budget, and trying to figure out how to make that happen. So as we started dealing with some of the pressures that we had, we started exploring big deals for primary source products. Were there opportunities for us to use one-time monies, end-of-year funds, gift funds, et cetera, to have a big impact? And we started looking at that in 2008, and between 2009 and 11, negotiated our first one with ProQuest, and we acquired 46 e-resources at that time, as well as digitization for a significant number of theses and dissertations from our institution. We wrote the contract up so other institutions in the state could piggyback off of that as well, if they had the opportunity. We were trying to extend the reach of that as much as we could. Between 2013 and the present, we had similar purchases from Gale, from Adam Matthews, from Alexander Street, and we made a difference for our campus. We were able to deliver a lot of content. We were able to do it at very favorable rates for our institutions, and we were able to give our humanities librarians opportunities to focus on acquiring more esoteric content, things that they would not be able to acquire otherwise. You know, as Teresa alluded to, you know, Lisa, the list just kept growing. And as they would try to compile funds across multiple disciplinary areas to purchase one database, 4 more would be released. And they felt like they were never, ever in a position where they could catch up. And the minute they would catch up with something, it was, you know, in some cases, no longer desired. It had, you know, fallen out of favor for the instructors that were advocating its acquisition. It was a never-ending cycle. The problem, and really the last thing is, we were able to better support the online programs that we had on our campus by delivering resources to students at a distance. Now, the big challenge that I felt looking at some of these things in the end was really the big dollar low use problem. We were acquiring some things that, even with the favorable pricing, we're not receiving the type of use that we would have liked, especially when some of our STEM librarians were looking at it and saying, look at what you're delivering for the cost. So ProQuest's access and build model, for us, we jumped on very early. There was no A, B plus, D, whatever model at that point in time. It was very much an experimentation. It was an experimentation for us because we really had no idea about what the impact would be on our labor force in trying to make this a reality. We're a Voyager institution still with SFX, and we're in the process of migrating to ALMA, which is interesting in its own way for a very large consortia. But we started looking at this try before we buy model because we wanted to see, was there a way to get away from that high cost, low use issue? So what we ended up with is broad-based access to a defined body of materials with pre-negotiated purchase pricing. For us, we know what it's going to cost us to acquire some of these materials in a couple years, which is actually very helpful for our subject specialists. We have new content coming out, which is great. The drawbacks that we had, as I mentioned, the labor issue was a challenge. And in order to counter that, what we effectively did was negotiate a go-live date that was several months after we were getting access to the content. So we could actually go through and begin uploading a lot of those records and turning on access. The real problem we had is that we're an ownership-oriented institution for this content. This is not an ownership model. And we were turning on a lot of content that our faculty, graduate students, and others were used to seeing come online and know was going to be there. And we had to figure out how to clearly indicate that that was not necessarily the case for this. And what we ended up doing was settling on language that we've sort of forced into the records and forced into our A to Z list that indicates that all of this is effectively a long-term trial. And then we have to go back as things are switched over to purchase and clean that up on our own. But we were very cognizant of that because we wanted to not mislead our faculty. We didn't want something to be, become critical to their coursework and potentially disappear. And then when we just wrapped up our first round of selection about 8 months ago, we asked our subject specialists what they wanted to see. They found 14 resources out of this that they thought were their highest priorities. The social scientists found one that they said they needed to have. And then we took a look at the use data, which was interesting because there was not a lot of commonality between the two. In fact, only 4 of the humanities titles overlapped with the things that were clearly most heavily used by our patrons on campus. And in the end, we purchased 10 is what we had resources for. We identified a couple newspapers, music resources, the social science product, and the women's magazine archive. Now, we have had a very active acquisitions program for a long time. As I mentioned earlier, we've made some fairly sizable acquisitions from ProQuest and Alexander Street in past years. So we had a lot of newspaper content already, which I think is perhaps why we didn't see our acquisitions more heavily weighted towards some of those resources. But in the end, what we turned on were clearly things that our campus, had an expressed desire to see on a more long-term basis. So I'll turn it over to Brian.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Gray. I'm Special Projects Officer, which that title really doesn't mean much, but about 75% of my role is collection strategy, collection budget, and then it could be anything else that the library is working on. I'm also going to acknowledge Stephanie Church, who's our acquisitions librarian. I'm going to be using a couple of her graphics. And I will say that we felt this program is successful because the frontline-facing research service librarians work very closely with our acquisition staff. To have both in the conversation the entire time while we were considering it, while we were making choices, really smoothed the implementation over because there was no surprises like, hey, we just bought this, now you implement it. Everyone was in the conversation from the beginning. We were a plan B. So we selected 75. So what I present will be a little different because we had to come at it a little differently. There were selections we had to make up front and at the back end. CASE is just under 12,000 students. We are not a military institution. Everyone thinks by this name we're a military institution. We're not. We're in Cleveland, Ohio. We're about 55% grad student though, and it's a very heavy STEM focus. So we approach this this access and build model for slightly different reasons than I think some of my colleagues did. We're also a very siloed institution, so there's 4 campus libraries that all report to different people and have different budgets. So we had more conversations up front on how we could work together to make a model of this work, and I'll share some of those things, how we approached it and what we learned through those conversations as well. But in the end, the Kelvin Smith Library, which I'm with, serves arts and humanities, the social sciences. Science and engineering is pretty much considered the undergraduate library. And then we also partnered in the end with the law library, who also contributed funding to this and also participated in the process. So what challenges were we trying to tackle with this kind of effort? First, we had flat or declining collection budgets for about a decade. We had one bad year of freshman enrollments did not meet targets, and we have a capped enrollment, so it's all budgeted on that number. And the library did a great job of making cuts that year, and as we've all probably experienced, if you do it really well, it never comes back. So we've been trying different models for the last decade to keep adding new content with pretty much the similar budget. And that's been a real challenge since we are such STEM focused, because STEM has higher inflation rates. So we were constantly being the moderator between our arts and humanities faculty and our STEM faculty of how we approach our budget situation. And so we thought this gave us a real opportunity to show the arts and humanities and social scientists that we're adding things while we're still having the expensive science journals and databases as well. Also, we weren't sure that the things the faculty were requesting really represented a need. We had the sense this would be awesome to have. I'd love to have this. I'd like to play with this. I might be the only one on campus that needs it, but I'm going to put my request in. And this gave us a chance to prove the things we were hearing were true or not true. It also took some of the librarians out of not having, maybe there was not always quite as strong of a liaison relationship with certain departments. So you weren't getting the needed feedback you needed to make some of these decisions. So actually seeing the usage really took some of that pressure off the librarians and then allowed them to continue to have conversations about, look, we solved a specific need, we have proof that that's true, we spent the money well, and that has led to, positive conversations about the library budget overall. And so we committed to this initially a 5-year program using Plan B. We decided to go 75 because of our STEM focus. One of the challenges we had is we had to take money from something else to do this. This was new for us. So, and what the librarians actually did is they've committed book and other one-time monies to this and said, well, we need to show use and show value. Let's sacrifice a little bit here and there to make this work. And so we went with 75 collections. We also committed to 5 years so that we could budget, we could prepare, there's no surprises. And one of the challenges we discussed also was, it is in some ways a trial. Because it's a subscription, essentially, that once you leave the program, the ones you don't convert just go away. And so we wanted it long enough that we can have regular conversations with our faculty. They're aware of what's available. We can really get a sample of use, because as we've experienced in many of our electronic resources, that first year is get the word out. You start seeing the increase, and it's not the second or third year till you really know what it levels off and you get a true sense of use. So we felt we needed 3 to 5 years to really understand where the value in this was and what decisions to make. And also, going the 5 years, we were able to leverage some dollars from the law library and find a partner there. There was enough political science content, current issues, things related to research areas of the law faculty. We were able to bring them into the partnership. And in the end, they contribute 25% of the money that goes into this program. How do we figure out what 75 to start with was interesting? We had existing wish lists. We didn't have 75 collections on the wish list, so that we had to figure out what else to do. So we did start with our existing wish list items. But to be on our wish list, the criteria are very low. It could be one faculty member said, I would love to have this collection. So we made sure those were included. Because if we did this program and they know those are from ProQuest, we did this, we rolled out a bunch of ProQuest stuff, and that wasn't included, and we figured that would just not be a good thing to deal with. So we'll include our wish list items. That'll get us started. Then because 2 libraries were committing the funding, we each got to vote or select equivalent amounts. So the law library selected 25% of the original 75 because that's the amount of funding they put into it. They did theirs very different. They have a collection committee, and the committee got together, did some preliminary selections, then they actually take it out to a secondary faculty committee who approves it, and then they came back and they told me, here's our selections, and they're in ranked order. And if the main library also wants some of these, this would be the next one in the list until we could get our 75. Our librarians in the main library, we just huddled in a room and sort of hashed it out and figured out and it was almost some bargaining and trading, well, if you get that, can I get this? And in the end it worked out, and even the science and engineering folks found stuff, because there is, history of science, there's archival materials you need, and even in our curriculum for STEM, they're being asked to bring in history and management and other aspects because they don't want just an engineer graduating. So they even found things in this list. So it was a very fair process. Everyone got to participate. We also looked for things that we thought would help the other 2 libraries, even though they weren't participating, because maybe we get it now, and they see the value. Maybe we have a financial partner in the future. So we also considered their needs as well in the process. This is one of the slides. I'll give credit to our acquisitions librarian. She uses Tableau to do these. And we looked at the usage data to make our selections at the end of the first year. But we looked at it in a lot of different ways. We didn't just assume highest use, just go down the list, we'll pick some until our money was used up. But we wanted to see what some of the trends were, and honestly, some of the surprises for us. We were surprised some of the ones that jumped off so big on the top because they weren't on the wish list. Many of the ones that were the highest uses for us were never anything faculty had ever mentioned, even though librarians had went into departmental meetings and said, hey, do you want to trial this? Here's a new collection ProQuest brought out. We see you're doing research in this area. Would this be a value? No. Well, we rolled them into here, and we were surprised. The librarians' hunches a few years ago were right on. Those were actually some of the ones that came right to the top. Also, we had quite a few newspapers on our wish list, and we included those. None of those were our top newspapers when we looked at the results. And it was very surprising, some of the regions that were represented and stuff, and how we approached that. We did not make selections just going down the list and say we'll take the top 1, top 2, top 3 until we used up the money. The law libraries putting in 25% of the money, got 25% of the selection power. One of the government document ones was actually high on the list. It was not a big deal. They said, here's our selection, done. The main librarians looked at the list, and since we've made a 5-year commitment, we said, well, we could play a little bit. We got time. If we do something this year, in the end, everything's still live for 5 years. It doesn't matter what we convert each year. So they actually decided, just in case, there's some kind of financial crisis or something, and we have to back out of this, what are the core ones that we would want in the end? And I think we converted 3 in the first year. They were all in our top 10, but they were not 1, 2, and 3. It was 1, 2, and 6, I think, or something like that. But they looked at different things too. It was important for us not to just look at people going to the platform. So you can see the top line is the searches. And the blue line is automated searches, so coming in from different places. And the actual red is more hands-on. So they started looking at what was actually downloaded what was actually click-through. So they didn't put as much value in they went to the platform or they went to do a search, but how much stuff was actually being used. And that was how the librarians decided to pick off which ones we wanted to convert and to start thinking about like maybe how we'll market these differently in the future. There was some variations we had to think through in how the collections were covered by usage statistics, since they were coming from different producers and different platforms that came into the ProQuest portfolio. There was variations in some of the statistics and how they were accounted for. So we had to think through that a little bit, especially if two things were really close together, like on two different platforms, like what does that really mean? And you can see we focused on the full text clicks, the views, and records accessed, rather than the searches. We actually supplemented the money a little bit in the first year because one of the ones we wanted would have taken above our spend, and we really wanted to lock that one in. So we actually supplemented by a couple $1,000s in the first year to lock that one in. We feel there's a little pressure because we have 5 years to play. And unlike Illinois, we did not market these as a trial. We've added them all to the database list as they're going to be there. But our faculty know no database on that list is safe. And so I think we've had enough of those conversations. What we did do, and this was to help the librarians that were in the conversations, is we use SpringShare for our A to Z list. And one of the facets is vendor. So we had a ProQuest category, obviously. But for this, we created a separate category of ProQuest 75. And that was the key to the librarian, that these could go away in the 5 years. And depending what conversation you're getting into, you know the background. And if you feel it's necessary to go in more depth with that faculty member in that conversation, that's your little reminder, your hint of how these are included in our collections. Marketing, we did not do a big marketing push the first year, and that was intentional. We had done, as my colleagues, we had done print DDA, we'd done e-DDA, we'd done evidence-based for videos and ebooks. In our first couple experiments, we did market it, and the faculty gamed the system, including telling students, this is the list of things you have to go click on, because we had students actually reported that to the library. So, we wanted this to be true and natural, so we decided not to market. We announced these 75 collections are being added. If a faculty member came to us, we would talk through the logistics. They go, well, we had a few say, where did you get money for 75 new collections when I need this? So there was a few people we've talked it through, but it wasn't like published that we're doing evidence-based and we're a 5-year commitment. And so we did one formal announcement and just sort of let it be. The librarians, though, did do some marketing for each of their departments. So they maybe have selected 1, 2, 3, a handful that were relevant to that department and talked about them just like they normally would in department meetings and emails, classroom settings, that kind of thing. They were in our database list. We did a write-up in them on our annual report, things like that. We are talking, though, about doing some marketing for year 2. But we haven't we're getting ready to go into year 2 now. We just finished our first year. But it's going to be more about the entirety of the collection, things like that, not in the model of why they're there or how we made the decisions. We also did segregate them in the database list, so that's to give the librarians a little comfort talking about them. Some of the things we learned through this and some of our observations, it wasn't easy to implement, but as everyone's spoke to, it is a lot of work. If you're turning on all these collections, we were not going through an ILS migration, but we were going from Summon to EBSCO Discovery during the process. And so we were dealing with that at the same time. And matter of fact, while we turned these on, we were in both, and we had them running in both to kick this project off. But once it was implemented, it was sit back and wait and see what happens, which was great. The acquisition staff said, thank you. Like, now we'll just wait and we'll talk to you in a year. But what our experience was, since we are STEM focused, is we struggled to even make those 75 selections to begin with. We hit about 40 to 50, and we were going, well, what's nice to have now? we had run out of ideas or gaps to fill or faculty suggestions, and Lisa told me that's why the 50 is now one of the models up there, because that was the number we hit. But we did find 75, and we did get use across all 75 collections, so we were happy with that. We're still monitoring the usage because we're seeing how the changes from some adapts go might hurt or harm the usage, and what'll play out with that is, you know, the metadata or how we've promoted it, things along those. But we're not seeing any major differences right now. We just we made our final 3 selections, so we're entering year 2. So the plan this year is to do more formal marketing. The downside is we just lost our marketing person, so we'll see how this is going to play out. That might be one of the special projects I just gained, but we'll see how that shakes out going forward. The law library, as far as I know, they also decided to just market these as we've added these, and they did not speak to the evidence-based model of it at all. But I don't think they promoted all 75. The whole university has access to the master database list we keep, but each of our professional libraries also keep a secondary list of fine-tuned to medicine or social work or law. So they selected the ones they thought were most appropriate to put in that list to not overwhelm the law faculty and students. And they were constantly involved in all the conversations about how we were going to market it across campus, how we're making our selections, and how we're approaching it long-term. And that's worked out really well. And we were able to work out ProQuest where they were able to get invoiced directly for their share, and it was really smooth on everything we had to do there. And now it's Lisa to do some closing comments, and we'll take some Q&A.
Thanks, Brian. So, thank you all, by the way, for sharing your experiences. I learned a lot listening to you, and I've been talking about these programs for a while now, so that was really, really nice. And Brian's exactly right. Our last slide is really just to kind of recap some of the things that we've been talking about. We put together a few things that we felt were advantages for both libraries and for ProQuest in being a part of a program like this. And so the first one that I definitely want to mention is I think it's important for everybody to just keep in mind that what we're talking about here is an EBA and not a DDA. I have a lot of conversations with librarians who are involved in DDA programs, and sometimes the spend on those can be very unpredictable. And so a lot of times that can be a concern. In this particular case, this is a subscription that then has that perpetual access component to it. So we're encouraging clicks here. We want these things to be used. We want to see what types of things people are going to download and use and you know, find value in. So the librarians don't have to have that concern, you know, that if they're getting a lot of clicks, that's then going to cost them more. This is not that type of a program. And that leads us to that second bullet, and I know a couple of the folks here mentioned this specifically. It's really nice because it's a predictable annual expenditure. That works for the libraries, and it also works for ProQuest. It's nice for us also to kind of be able to predict, you know, customers that work with us in a program like this. We know that they're involved and that they're going to be converting every year, and hopefully, you know, if you signed up for a 3-year or a 5-year program, I mean, obviously our wish is that you'll continue to do this well past the 3 to 5 years, and that this will just remain a partnership between the librarian with ProQuest. But it also gives you the ability to provide access to anywhere from 50 to about 350 plus collections while you're still adding, you're still chipping away at that wish list. It's continuing to grow like we've talked about, but you're making progress year after year being a part of this program. We have some really nice examples of places where we have seen within the Theses and Dissertations database or within the ProQuest eBook Central database, where, just as an example, the ProQuest History Vault, we did some searching on that to see how often is that cited in a dissertation or in a published work. And so we've got some really great examples, and we know that when these collections are activated and they are available on campus, they are used in a very meaningful way by your students and by your faculty. Your faculty wants to publish and they want to be able to be original in their research. They want to be able to talk about something that maybe nobody else has ever thought of before or published on that topic before. So these types of collections, they allow them to do that type of thing. And then my last bullet is where we started with this as well, just the general importance of primary sources for research and for teaching. These assignments that students have where their professor says to them, you need to write me a 10-page paper and it needs to include at least 3 primary sources. I know those things can make the students cringe sometimes, but faculty told us again and again and again, this is important because those types of resources are what help students develop those critical thinking skills that they need when they graduate and when they go out into the workforce. Professors tell us that, employers tell us that, there's just no denying it. And these collections help to create that type of a well-rounded student. So I'm looking at my watch. I think we have about 15 minutes left in our time together. So we definitely can do some Q&A if anybody has questions for the panelists. I believe there's a microphone kind of up here at the top of the aisle. So if anybody has any questions, we're happy to take those.
Was great. I came in a little late, so I may have missed it, but is there a minimum PAL acquisition commitment that is linked to the subscription component? In other words, you sign up for 3 or 5 years, are you required to acquire so many collections? And if so, did you all budget for that? Or you must have, I guess. And could you talk a little bit about that?
So just in a very general concept, obviously the pricing for every institution is individualized, and that has to do with, it depends out of the catalog, how many of these collections have you already acquired maybe over the years. So everybody's price is individual, but the way that the math works out, we treat it as a subscription cost. And then for your subscription cost, you convert 2/3 of that amount over to perpetual access every year. So easy math, if your subscription is $100 a year, then 67 of those dollars get converted over to perpetual access. Yeah.
I understand the math, but so there's a requirement then that you buy so many collections. So you explain the math, but
right. So that gets converted,
okay.
And I guess, forgive me again if I'm misunderstanding. It's kind of a use it or lose it situation.
Right. So it's the use it. So you folks knew that you were going to acquire so many going in.
Yeah. We knew that we had a certain number of dollars to spend. And what we did as we were negotiating this to begin with was essentially receive a price list for every one of the databases that were turned on. So what we could do is then turn around and say, well, we have $67 to spend, and this one costs us $6, and this one is going to cost us $8. And as it went down the list, then we ended up with 10 that our institution was able to convert over.
Thanks for the presentation. Have any of you compared usage statistics from this package or this product to your other primary source content purchased using other methods?
We ran numbers on everything that we had, and there are things that, for example, one of the early European books. Our institution had purchased one module of that years ago, and frankly, the usage on that and the usage on the other modules was very low, despite the fact that some of our humanists in the library wanted to add additional modules. There was really no demonstrated need for us to commit dollars to those. Either for the one we had or for the ones that we could have converted over to an ownership model. We ended up looking at as I said, resources that frankly our humanists did not, in all cases, necessarily rank very high because the usage was there in ways that they didn't expect.
I mean, our answer is a little boring because our usage was a bit all over the place because of the migration, so we didn't really want to compare anything quite yet just because we felt the usage wasn't representative of what it could be.
We do cost per use on everything, and we also try to group things by discipline so we're not doing apples to oranges. But we find, I think, sort of what has been referenced here is the arts humanities is all over the place, and it's hard to see any trends when we look at our art humanities primary source e-resources. But what we're looking at over time is, or what we've realized is, unlike the science and engineering where everyone hits it hard when we pick something because it's towards a major research area or funding, you know, that one source might be the only thing that faculty member in that humanities area needs to write their book. So what we're looking at is just consistent usage across the 75 we selected and comparable cost per use or number of uses that we've seen historically, maybe against other ProQuest primary sources that we've bought, because we bought quite a bit before. We usually bought 1 to 2 a year. So we did have some history to look back on, and that's the closest thing we could compare to.
Just curious if you'd speak a little bit about issues with and any breakthroughs on text and data mining. I know that initially it was about stuff that we owned we could use, but I didn't know if there had been any changes to that, if any of the other content had been expanded so that our users could have the full corpus, but only for text and data mining.
Oh, to me, I was going to say, yeah. I don't know if anyone from ProQuest wants to answer. I know there's a couple in the audience that may know.
If you want to step up to the microphone, you might actually be the best person to address this.
But thank you.
Not trying to be too self-promoting here, but next year, we're in the spring, we're launching a text and data mining studio. So all content that universities have either subscriptions to and or have purchased, it's a subscription model for faculty to go into the studio, and any content that you have a subscription or have purchased, you can access it in a TDM environment with the tools, various tools that will be provided, and you'll be able to go in and knock yourself out in terms of any kind of research that a faculty or researcher chooses to do. And we'll have the different vector analysis and sentiment analysis and correlation analysis, and all the various tools will be provided in the environment. And as long as examples of teaching, so they can know what kind of content gets what kind of output and outcome. Okay? I think it's available around April-ish. So yes, this is a perfect example of your faculty can jump in this model.
Any last questions? Well, thank you so much for coming this afternoon, and we'll stick around here if you want to ask us questions individually. Thank you.